Most people watched Jon Snow walk through that tunnel at the end of Game of Thrones and felt cheated. Here was a man who had died and come back to life, a man whose blood was equal parts Stark and Targaryen, a man who had every legal claim to the Iron Throne that Westeros had ever seen, and the show sent him north, into the snow, with the wildlings, no throne, no crown, no kingdom. Fans lost their minds. Some called it the worst ending in television history. Some said it was a slap in the face to 8 years of investment. But what if they were completely wrong? What if Jon Snow's ending was not a punishment, not a failure, not a mistake by the writers, but the single most deliberate and perfectly constructed conclusion George R.R. Martin ever designed? And what if the key to understanding it was sitting in plain sight the entire time, in the form of a blind old man at Castle Black who most casual viewers never paid enough attention to? His name was Aemon Targaryen, and everything Jon Snow did in that finale was a reflection of the life Aemon had already lived. Let's start from the beginning, because the parallel between these two men runs deeper than most people realise. Aemon was born a prince of House Targaryen, the third son of King Maester I. He had two older brothers, Daeron, known as the Drunken, and Aerion, known as Brightflame, who was genuinely unstable and cruel. Now, as the third son of a fourth son, Aemon was never supposed to be anywhere near the line of succession. And yet, his grandfather, King Daeron II, looked at his ever-growing brood of Targaryen princes and made a decision. Too many male heirs in one royal family, he believed, was as dangerous as too few. So when Aemon was around 9 or 10 years old, Daeron II sent him to the citadel in Old Town to be trained as a maester. Aemon's own father, Mekar, objected to this. He did not want his son serving others, but Daeron overruled him. That is a detail that matters. Aemon did not choose the citadel himself as a boy. It was chosen for him, and yet he embraced it completely. He earned his chain by age 19 and gave himself to that life without bitterness. Then the deaths came. Daeron, the eldest, died of a pox he caught from a brothel. Aerion, the second son, died in an even more spectacular fashion. He convinced himself that he was a dragon in human form, drank wildfire to prove it, and burned to death from the inside out. Then Mekar himself fell in battle during a rebellion by House Peak, killed when a stone was dropped from the walls of their castle during the storming. Suddenly the succession was a crisis. A great council was called, and the council turned to Aemon. He was the rightful heir. He was educated, wise, and by every account more suited to rule than anyone they could find. Aemon said no. He was a sworn Maester. He had pledged himself to the Order, which meant he had given up his family name, his inheritance, his claim to everything. So he refused the crown and let it pass to his younger brother, who most people had never expected to be king. That younger brother became Aegon V, remembered in history as Aegon the Unlikely. But Aemon did not stop there. He understood that simply refusing the throne was not enough. Someone might still try to use him as a political weapon against his brother. So he took the Black. He went to the Wall. He became the Maester at Castle Black, and he spent approximately 65 years there, watching from the frozen edge of the world as his family's dynasty slowly destroyed itself from the inside. He watched Aegon's son, Aerys II, descend into the madness that would earn him the name the Mad King. He received ravens telling him about Rhaegar's death in battle at the Trident, and then about the killing of Rhaegar's children in King's Landing. He sat on the Wall as Robert's rebellion tore his family apart, and he did not move. He stayed because he had made a choice, and the choice was duty over everything else. Now hold that image in your head, because roughly 65 years later a young man named Jon Snow stood in a nearly identical position and made the same choice.
We break the wheel together.
You are my queen.
When Jon Snow killed Daenerys Targaryen in the throne room of King's Landing, he did not do it because she was easy to kill. He loved her. And minutes later, he put a knife through her heart. Why? In the Season 8 finale, right before Jon walks into that throne room, Tyrion is trying to convince him to do what they both know has to be done. Tyrion tells Jon he loves Daenerys too, that love is more powerful than reason. And Jon, almost to himself, quietly says, "Love is the death of duty." Tyrion asks if he made that up. Jon tells him it's something Maester Aemon said to him long ago. Then Tyrion flips it back. Sometimes duty is the death of love. That exchange is the entire thesis of Jon Snow's story, and it came from Aemon. Aemon had said those words to Jon years earlier, in Season 1, when news from the south was getting worse by the day. Ned Stark imprisoned, the family at war, the realm falling apart, and Jon was on the verge of abandoning his vows and riding south to fight for the Starks. Aemon sat with him in the dark and said this: "Love is the death of duty. If the day should ever come when your Lord Father was forced to choose between honour and those he loves, what would he do?" And then he revealed that he himself was a Targaryen, that he had sat on the wall while his own family was destroyed one by one, and that he had stayed because that was the only right thing to do. Jon stayed that night. He went back to the wall, and years later, when the hardest moment of his life arrived, he remembered those words. He killed Daenerys. Not because he wanted to, not because it was easy, but because Daenerys had burned King's Landing to ash and cinders, killing thousands of innocent people even after the city had surrendered. And Aemon Targaryen had already shown him that the right thing and the easy thing are almost never the same. That is not a bad ending. That is the point of the whole show.
How are you feeling?
Oh, like a 100-year-old man slowly freezing to death.
I need your advice. There's something I want to do, something that half the men will hate me the moment I give the order.
Half the men hate you already, Lord Commander. Do it. Kill the boy, Jon Snow, and let the man be born.
Now let's talk about the kill the boy speech, because this is where the two men are most directly connected, and it is one of the most carefully constructed scenes in the entire series. In Season 5, Jon is the new Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. He has a plan. Bring the wildlings through the wall, let them settle in the abandoned lands of the north, and use them as soldiers against the coming army of the dead. Every single person around him thinks this is insane. His own men despise it. Ollie, the boy who would eventually stab him, looks at him with open contempt. Even his closest friends are uncomfortable. Jon goes to Aemon, and this is what Aemon tells him. Egg had an innocence to him, a sweetness we all loved. Kill the boy within you. It takes a man to rule. Kill the boy and let the man be born. He was talking about his brother Aegon, the same man who became King Aegon V. He had given that exact same advice to his own brother before leaving for the wall, telling him that being a good man and being a good king are not always the same thing. A boy wants to be liked. A man makes the decision that needs to be made and accepts the consequences. Then Aemon looked at Jon directly and said the words that defined the rest of Jon's arc. "Kill the boy, Jon Snow. Winter is almost upon us. Kill the boy and let the man be born." In the books, this line is even more significant. George R.R. Martin writes Jon repeating those words to himself in his head not once, not twice, but 8 times across that chapter. Every hard decision Jon makes, every painful choice, he's literally hearing Aemon's voice in his own mind. When he forces Gilly to agree to a plan she hates, he thinks, "Kill the boy." When he overrides Sam's resistance to being sent away to the Citadel, he thinks, "Kill the boy." When he has Janos Slynt executed for outright refusing a direct order, he does not just think it, he acts on it. The man Aemon tried to create was not someone cold or ruthless. It was someone capable of doing what was right, even when it cost him personally. And every decision Jon Snow makes in the final seasons is the direct result of that lesson. Here is the piece of this story that almost nobody talks about.
Egg, I dreamed that I was old.
When Aemon was dying in Season 5, delirious with fever on a ship off the coast of Dawn, sailing from Braavos toward Old Town, he started hallucinating. He called out for his brother. He called him Egg. And in that moment he said, "Egg, I dreamed that I was old." At that exact moment, Jon Snow was at Castle Black, not knowing his great-great-uncle had just died. And Aemon, in all his wisdom, had never known that Jon was his family. He never knew that the boy he had mentored, the boy he had poured decades of Targaryen wisdom into, was actually of his blood. In the show's compressed timeline, Aemon was Jon's great-great-uncle. In the books, where a full generation exists between them, he was one step further removed still. But here is the thing that makes this haunting. In the books, there is a moment where Aemon says, right before he leaves for the voyage that will kill him, "I should not have left the wall. Lord Snow could not have known, but I should have seen it." He was talking about a prophecy, about the prince that was promised. He had begun to suspect the prophecy pointed to Daenerys, but there are scholars of this series who believe that Aemon, in his last days, was beginning to realise that the dragon he had been looking for was not in Essos at all. It was at the wall. It was Jon. He never got to tell him. He never got to sit across from Jon and say, "You are one of us. You are my blood. Everything I ever told you, I told you as your family." But he did not need to, because the lesson had already been given, and Jon had already internalised it so deeply that when the final moment came, he made the exact same choice Aemon had made 65 years earlier. He walked away from the throne. Think about how the history actually repeats here. After Aemon refused the crown, it passed to his younger brother. After Jon's imprisonment and exile, the crown passed to Bran Stark, chosen by a council. Aemon then made himself physically scarce by going to the wall, ensuring no one could use him as a political weapon against his brother's reign. Jon's exile to the wall served the same function. The structural parallel is exact. A Targaryen with a strong claim to the throne steps aside, makes himself inaccessible, and lets a less expected person rule. Aemon did it to protect Aegon. Jon did it to protect whatever fragile peace remained after Daenerys had burned King's Landing to the ground, and both men ended up at the wall. Both men found something at the frozen edge of the world that they could never have found in the south. Aemon found purpose, respect, and roughly 65 years of meaningful service. Jon, if the show's ending is taken at face value, found something even more than that. He found freedom. There is a line from Aemon that sits quietly in the books, never making it into the show. It comes near the end of his life when he is advising Samwell about Jon. He says, "Allow me to give my lord one last piece of counsel, the same counsel I once gave my brother when we parted for the last time. He was 33 when the Great Council chose him to mount the Iron Throne. That council, which we do not get the full text of, was likely the same thing Aemon had told himself every day for 65 years. The throne is not the prize. Survival is not the prize. Living with the choices you made and knowing they were right is the only prize worth having." Jon Snow was older than Aegon was when he made his choice. He had already been king. He had already been Lord Commander. He had already died and come back. He had nothing left to prove to anyone. And what he chose, in the end, was not exile. It was not punishment. It was the life Aemon had always been pointing him toward. The most underrated visual in the entire Game of Thrones finale is Jon Snow walking through the tunnel at Castle Black. That tunnel is the exact same one Jon walked through in Season 1 when he first arrived. It was the same stone passage, the same darkness on one side and grey northern light on the other. The difference is that the first time Jon was going north because he had no other options. He was a bastard with no future, choosing the only path that was open to him. The last time Jon walked through that tunnel as a man who had held command, held love, held a kingdom, held the weight of an entire species on his shoulders. He walked through it as a man who could have argued for the throne and probably gotten it. He walked through it as a man who chose freely and fully to go north. Maester Aemon made the same walk, chose the same cold, the same distance from power, and Aemon spent roughly 65 years at that wall, and by every account in both the show and the books, he was not miserable. He was at peace. He was the wisest, most respected man at Castle Black. He was the man everyone came to when they needed to understand something about themselves. Jon Snow was walking toward that same life. There is one more thing worth saying about what Aemon represented in this story, and why his lesson to Jon was the most important one in the entire series. Every Targaryen who chased the throne ended in tragedy. Aerys went mad. Rhaegar died on the Trident. Viserys got a golden crown he could not wear. Daenerys burned a city and was killed in the one place she had fought her entire life to reach. The two Targaryens who walked away from the throne lived with something none of the others had: clarity. Aemon knew who he was. He knew what he was for. He was not a king. He was not a prince. He was the man who sat at the edge of the world and told the truth to anyone who came to him and asked. Jon Snow, in the end, became that same thing. Not a king, not a ruler, but the man who walked north with the free folk, the man who had the north in him, the man who was exactly where he was supposed to be. There is a line in the books where Aemon says something that sounds simple, but carries the weight of his entire life. He says, "Many good men have been bad kings, and some bad men have been good kings." Jon Snow understood that better than anyone, and rather than risk being one of the bad kings, he did what the wisest man he ever knew had done. He chose the cold. He chose the duty that no one could see. He chose the life that looks like a punishment, but is actually the only real freedom the story ever offered anyone. Aemon Targaryen spent roughly a century figuring that out. Jon Snow learned it in a single conversation, and when the moment came, he remembered every word. That is not a sad ending. That is the best ending a Targaryen ever got. If this video hit different for you, drop a comment with what you think Aemon's greatest lesson to Jon was. Was it kill the boy? Was it love is the death of duty? Or was it something else entirely? Something in between the lines that he never actually said out loud? And if you want more deep dives into the stories within the story of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, the ones most people missed, subscribe. There is a lot more where this came from.